Welcome to Deduction Junction, where mysteries unfold and every detail holds a clue. Step into the brilliant mind of Hercule Poirot, the world's greatest detective, as we journey through his most intriguing cases. With logic sharper than a razor and an eye for the smallest detail, Poirot unravels crimes that leave others baffled. Get ready to immerse yourself in a world of suspense, deception, and of course, the little gray cells. The investigation begins now. Chapter 1. The Crimson Invitation. The velvet curtain of the Royal Opera House shimmered under the dazzling chandeliers, casting golden light across the elegantly dressed audience. It was an evening of sophistication and grandeur, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and anticipation. The famed soprano, Madame Céleste Arnaud, was set to perform her final aria, her voice rumored to be as haunting as it was divine. Among the crowd sat Hercule Poirot, his small, precise frame clad in an immaculately tailored evening suit. His mustache, waxed to perfection, twitched slightly as he observed the gathering with quiet amusement. Beside him, Captain Hastings, his steadfast companion, shifted in his seat, clearly enchanted by the atmosphere. "I say, Poirot, there's nothing quite like the opera, is there?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, mon ami, it is indeed an affair most dramatic. Music, passion, tragedy, all wrapped in the velvet folds of the stage. And yet—" Hastings glanced at him curiously. "And yet what?" Poirot's gaze flickered toward the royal box, where the Marquis de la Roche, a wealthy French aristocrat, sat in quiet conversation with a mysterious woman clad in red. She wore a striking crimson opera mask, adorned with gold filigree. Her lips painted a matching shade of deep red. Something about her poise, her unnatural stillness, unsettled Poirot. He tapped his fingers lightly against the armrest. "And yet, my dear Hastings, I sense that tonight's performance will not be confined to the stage." Hastings chuckled. "Surely you're not suggesting a crime, Poirot? In a place like this?" Poirot smiled slightly. "My friend, crime is an art, much like opera. And where there is an audience, there is always the possibility of drama." Just then, the final aria began. Madame Céleste took center stage, her arms outstretched, her voice rising in a crescendo so powerful it sent shivers through the audience. The orchestra swelled, every note a plea, a heartbreak, a farewell. The entire room was spellbound, and then a scream shattered the enchantment. Poirot and Hastings turned sharply. In the royal box, a figure had slumped forward, their body collapsing against the railing. A single gloved hand dangled lifelessly, illuminated by the golden glow of the chandeliers. The house erupted into chaos. Hastings gasped. "Good heavens! Someone's been—" Poirot was already rising, his sharp eyes locked onto the crimson-masked woman who stood motionless, her gaze fixed upon the fallen body. A voice cried out from the box. "The Marquis de la Roche is dead!" The orchestra ceased abruptly, the conductor's baton frozen mid-air. Poirot exhaled softly, adjusting his cuffs. "Ah, I feared as much." Hastings blinked at him. "Feared as much? Poirot, you mean to say you saw this coming?" Poirot nodded, already moving toward the staircase leading to the private boxes. "I suspected, mon ami. But now we must determine the final act and the identity of the killer." As they ascended, Poirot's gaze once more flickered toward the mysterious woman in red. Her crimson mask still concealed her expression, but he was certain of one thing. She knew something. And before the night was over, Hercule Poirot would find out what. Chapter 2. The gathering of suspects. The Royal Opera House had been transformed from a palace of artistry into a scene of chaos. Murmurs rippled through the grand hall, the once mesmerized audience now abuzz with confusion and horror. The Marquis de la Roche, one of France's most prominent aristocrats, lay slumped in his seat in the royal box, lifeless. Hercule Poirot ascended the grand staircase, his keen eyes sweeping over the gathered spectators. He had observed many crime scenes in his career, but murder in the midst of a performance, with the entire audience as witness, presented a mystery as theatrical as the opera itself. Captain Hastings followed closely, his face creased with unease. "I say, Poirot, what an awful business. How on earth does someone manage a murder in the middle of a performance without anyone noticing?" Poirot's mustache twitched slightly. "Ah, mon ami, that is precisely what we must determine. For, you see, this was not the work of an ordinary assassin. No, this was a crime of timing, of precision, of theatricality." As they reached the royal box, Inspector Jules Bernard of the Sûreté Nationale, a broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed moustache, greeted them with a curt nod. His expression was severe, his patience thin. "Monsieur Poirot, Bernard." Acknowledged, his French accent thick. "I was told you were present tonight. A fortuitous circumstance, I suppose." Poirot tilted his head slightly. "Fortune, perhaps, or fate. Either way, we must unravel the mystery before us, no?" Bernard gestured toward the body of the Marquis, still slumped forward in his chair, his once pristine white cravat now stained a deep red. A single puncture wound at the base of his throat was visible beneath his chin, small, precise, deadly. Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Ah, but mon ami, the rush to judgment is often the greatest error of all." Hastings, his brow furrowed, cleared his throat. "But surely, Poirot, someone must have seen something." Poirot turned his gaze toward the figures assembled in the dimly lit box. Madame Celeste Arnaud, the soprano, still trembled slightly, though whether from fear or lingering performance nerves was unclear. Comte Armand Duval, the late Marquise's friend, stood rigid, his fingers tapping impatiently against his cuff. Vivienne Morel, the enigmatic woman in the crimson opera mask, remained poised, her hands clasped in front of her, unshaken. Léon Mercier, the valet, hovered at the edge of the group, his face drawn and pale. Madame Isolde Beauchamp, the patroness, sat delicately in a chair, her large eyes darting between Poirot and Bernard as though unsure what to say. "Bernard," exhaled sharply. "We begin with the most obvious suspect," he announced. "The person closest to the victim." All eyes turned to Vivienne Morel. Bernard gestured toward her. "Mademoiselle Morel, you were seated beside the Marquis. If he was stabbed, how could you not have noticed?" Vivienne's crimson lips curled into the faintest smile. "Perhaps because I am not the one who stabbed him, Inspector." Bernard's jaw tightened. "That remains to be seen." Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm, measured. "Mademoiselle, let us be clear. You said you knew he was dead before. The performance's final act. That is an interesting claim." Vivienne tilted her head. "Interesting or suspicious?" Poirot smiled. "Both." She let out a soft breath, her gloved hands adjusting her silk shawl. "I am no fool, monsieur. Poirot, I may not have seen the exact moment the blow was struck, but I know death when I see it." Hastings frowned. "But how?" Vivienne's expression remained unreadable behind her mask. The Marquise's breathing had changed. A man in pain, dying, does not breathe the same as a man at ease. Poirot nodded approvingly. "Très bien, mademoiselle. You have a keen observation," Bernard scoffed. "So you claim you simply noticed he was dead and decided to say nothing?" Vivienne's shoulders lifted slightly. Screaming would not have brought him back to life, would it? A ripple of discomfort spread through the group. Madame Celeste, still shaken, clutched her opera gloves tightly. "It's all so horrible," she murmured. "How could anyone kill a man like that? And in such a theatrical way?" Poirot's eyes glinted. "Ah, madam, but that is precisely what makes this crime so artistic." Before Bernard could press further, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed outside the box. A young usher, pale and out of breath, rushed into the room. "Inspector!" he gasped. One of the Marquis's belongings has been found, a note. It was discovered under his seat. Poirot's eyebrows lifted. A note, you say? The usher handed the small folded parchment to Bernard, who opened it with a frown. The handwriting was neat and precise. Meet me during the second intermission. We have much to discuss. Do not delay. It was unsigned. Bernard turned the note over, his frown deepening. This was written on Royal Opera House stationery. Someone in this very building sent it. Poirot examined the note, his fingers tracing the paper lightly. His eyes glimmered with something like satisfaction. Well, mes amis, he murmured, the plot thickens. Léon Mercier, the Marquis's valet, suddenly shifted nervously. His fingers twitched, his shoulders tensed. Poirot noticed at once. Ah, Monsieur Mercier, Poirot said smoothly. You seem uneasy. Mercier's eyes darted around the room. I have no idea what that note means, Monsieur Poirot. The Marquis did not tell me of any meeting. Bernard eyed him sharply. You were the closest servant to the Marquis. Are you saying he didn't mention any secret appointments? Mercier licked his lips. No! He was private about his affairs. Poirot stepped forward slightly. And yet, monsieur, you were seen leaving the box just before the second act. The valet froze. Madame Beauchamp let out a small gasp. That's true. I saw him leave. I assumed it was for an errand. Bernard's eyes narrowed. Where did you go, Mercier? The valet swallowed hard. I went to the lobby, just for air. Ah, Poirot said softly. For air or for a meeting? A beat of silence. Then Mercier suddenly bolted for the door. Stop him! Bernard roared. The inspector lunged forward, grabbing the valet by the arm just as he tried to shove past the usher. Mercier let out a strangled cry, but within seconds he was pinned against the wall. Poirot exhaled softly, watching the scene with an almost amused expression. Mon cher Bernard, it appears we have found our first false lead. With Mercier. Restrained, Bernard turned back to Poirot. You suspected him from the start, didn't you? Poirot smiled slightly. Ah, but of course. A guilty man flees. A truly innocent man does not panic. Hastings let out a breath of relief. Well, that settles it, doesn't it? The valet must have done it. But Poirot only shook his head. No. No, mon ami, he said. Monsieur Mercier is guilty, yes, but not of murder. Bernard's brow furrowed. Then what? Poirot's gaze flickered once more to the crimson-masked woman, Vivienne Morel. Oh, Poirot murmured. I suspect we have only begun to uncover the true nature of this crime. As Mercier was dragged away protesting, Poirot adjusted his cuffs and turned back to the assembled group. The real murderer, he said softly, has yet to make their final move. And with that, the investigation into the enigma of the Crimson Opera mask truly began. Chapter 4. The Psychological. Game. The tension in the royal box remained thick, the air charged with unspoken suspicion. The failed escape of Léon Mercier, the Marquis's valet, had confirmed what Poirot already knew. Mercier was hiding something. But was it murder? The sound of whispered speculation continued beyond the heavy curtains. The orchestra pit remained, eerily silent, the performers long since dismissed. The grand chandelier flickered slightly, casting elongated shadows across the tense faces of the remaining suspects. Poirot took his customary measured step forward, adjusting his cuffs with meticulous precision. He glanced at Inspector Bernard, who was still overseeing the removal of Mercier by the gendarmes. The valet's protests had faded, replaced by the quiet murmurs of onlookers outside the box. Poirot exhaled softly, then turned his sharp gaze back to the gathered individuals. Mes amis, he began, his voice calm yet unwavering. We now find ourselves at a most delicate juncture. A crime has been committed, one of precision, one of theatricality, and yet, though a man has fled, the true culprit remains among us. A ripple of unease passed through the group. Captain Hastings glanced around the room, his military instincts kicking in. "Well then, Poirot, who do you suspect?" Poirot's mustache twitched slightly. "Ah, mon cher Hastings, the question is not whom I suspect, but how I shall make them reveal themselves." He folded his hands together, his eyes gleaming. "And for that we must play a game, a psychological game, if you will," Inspector Bernard huffed. "Enough with the theatrics, Poirot. If you have suspicions, state them plainly." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, but mon ami, that is where you misunderstand. The truth, like an opera, must unfold at its own pace." His gaze swept the room, settling on each suspect in turn. Madame Celeste Arnaud, the celebrated soprano, still visibly shaken, clutched the folds of her gown as if trying to steady herself. Comte Armand Duval, the late Marquise's confidant, stood rigidly, his expression unreadable. Vivienne Morel, the enigmatic woman in the crimson opera mask, remained poised, her features concealed, but her presence ever commanding. Madame Isolde Beauchamp, the wealthy patron, sat with her hand resting delicately against her throat, her eyes flitting from face to face. Poirot let the silence settle before speaking again. Poirot took a step toward Madame Celeste Arnaud. "Madame, you are an artist of great renown, oui?" Celeste nodded hesitantly. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot." "And, tell me," he continued, "is it not true that an artist above all else must listen carefully? That in the moments of performance, the subtlest of cues can change everything?" Celeste swallowed hard. "Yes, of course." Poirot smiled slightly. "Then I must ask, Madame, did you hear anything unusual during your performance? A sound out of place?" Celeste's brows knitted together. I don't know." Poirot watched her carefully, his expression patient. "Think, Madame. You sang your final aria with great passion, oui? But before that, during the second act, did you hear anything?" Celeste's fingers tightened on her gown. "There was a sound, I think. A faint whisper." Hastings leaned forward. "A whisper?" Celeste nodded slowly. "It was fleeting, almost like a breath, but it wasn't from the audience." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, a breath. How very interesting." He turned to Vivienne Morel, the woman in red. "Mademoiselle Morel," he said smoothly, "you wear a mask that conceals much. But tell me, do you also conceal the truth?" Vivienne remained still. "That depends, Monsieur Poirot. Are you asking if I am a liar?" Poirot smiled faintly. "No. I ask if you are a performer, much like Madame Celeste." Her lips curled, slightly. "Every woman in high society is a performer, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot chuckled. "Touché, mademoiselle. And yet, I suspect that you have not been entirely forthcoming." Vivienne's posture remained poised. "What do you mean?" Poirot gestured toward the crimson mask. "You told us that you knew the Marquis was dead before anyone else did. Not suspected, knew. And now, Madame Celeste tells us that she heard a whisper before his death. Vivienne remained silent. Poirot stepped closer. "Tell me, Mademoiselle Morel, did you speak to the Marquis just before he died?" A sharp intake of breath from Madame Beauchamp. Hastings exclaimed, "By Jove, Poirot, you think she was the last to see him alive?" Poirot's eyes never left Vivienne's masked face. "I do not think, Hastings. I know." A heavy silence filled the box. Then, finally, Vivienne spoke. "Yes," she admitted softly. "I spoke to him." Bernard exhaled sharply. "Why the devil didn't you say that before?" Vivienne's crimson lips parted slightly. "Because it was not relevant." Poirot's brows lifted. "Ah, mademoiselle, but everything is relevant. She inclined her head. Fine. Yes, I spoke to the Marquis before he died. But I did not kill him. Poirot's voice remained calm. Then tell us, what did you say? Vivienne hesitated. Then finally, she whispered, I told him that someone wanted him dead. A collective gasp filled the room. Poirot smiled softly. Ah, now, mes amis, we are truly getting somewhere. Bernard took a firm step forward. You expect us to believe that you knew he was in danger and said nothing? Vivienne's eyes darkened. I tried to warn him. I told him to leave the opera house immediately, but he laughed at me. He said that no one would dare touch him. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And what did you say to that, mademoiselle? Vivienne's voice dropped to a whisper. I told him that arrogance would be his downfall. Poirot exhaled. And was it? Vivienne stared at him for a long moment. Then she removed her mask. The room fell silent. Beneath the mask, her left cheek bore a faint scar, a thin, pale mark, as if from an old wound. Poirot stepped forward, intrigued. And now, Mademoiselle Morel, I believe you have much more to tell us. Chapter 5. Another crime or major reveal. Charged silence fell over the royal box as Vivienne Morel slowly lowered her crimson mask, revealing the faint scar along her left cheek. The subtle imperfection seemed at odds with the air of mystery and elegance she had cultivated so well. Poirot observed her with quiet intensity, the lines of his mustache still as he studied her reaction. A scar was no ordinary detail. It was a mark of history, a wound with a story attached, and Poirot, ever meticulous, had no intention of letting it go unexplored. Captain Hastings cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. I say, Poirot, what do you make of this? Poirot lifted a delicate hand. Patience, Hastings. Mademoiselle Morel, I must ask, how did you come by that scar? Vivienne's lips pressed together, her gaze sharp. I fail to see how that is relevant to the Marquise's murder, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot smiled thinly. Ah, mademoiselle, relevance is a matter of perspective. Allow me to explain. A woman such as yourself, poised, composed, does not often leave her face unguarded unless she has something to gain by it. She tilted her head slightly. And what, precisely, do you think I have to gain? Poirot's eyes glimmered. The truth. The words hung between them. Hastings let out an exasperated sigh. Really, Poirot, this is all very dramatic, but how does a scar connect to a murder? Poirot did not look away from Vivienne. Because, Hastings, a scar is a memory made permanent, and sometimes a memory is the key to understanding a crime. Vivienne inhaled deeply, her composure shifting ever so slightly. Fine. If you must know, I received this scar from a duel. A ripple of shock passed through the room. Madame Beauchamp gasped. A duel? But how dreadfully barbaric. Vivienne's expression remained unreadable. In certain circles, madame, honor is settled in blood. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And was it the Marquis who wounded you? A pause. Then, a single nod. A hushed murmur spread among the assembled guests. Hastings blinked in disbelief. Good heavens! You mean to say that you and the Marquis once fought a duel? Vivienne's voice was even, but there was something beneath it. An old anger, carefully tamed. Years ago, in Paris, we had a disagreement. He was a man of great power, and I had uncovered something he would rather have kept buried. I challenged him, and he accepted. Bernard folded his arms. And he gave you that scar? Vivienne's lips curled slightly. Yes, and in return, I gave him one. Poirot's gaze hardened slightly. Where? Vivienne held his stare. Across his ribs. Poirot turned sharply toward the body of the Marquis, his mind working at a rapid pace. He stepped forward, motioning to Bernard. "Inspector, may I trouble you for a closer examination of the body?" Bernard sighed but nodded, crouching beside the slumped corpse. Poirot joined him, carefully parting the Marquis's waistcoat to reveal his silk shirt underneath. Poirot's sharp eyes immediately focused on something beneath the fabric, something no one had thought to check before: a thin, white scar. Running diagonally across his ribs, Poirot's expression darkened. Vivienne had told the truth. Hastings peered over his shoulder. "Well, I'll be damned. So he did have a duel." Poirot straightened, adjusting his cuffs with precision. "Indeed." "Hastings, but the question is, was it a duel that ended in death?" Before anyone could respond, a piercing scream echoed from the corridor. The entire room jerked to attention. Bernard spun toward the door. "What in God's name?" Poirot was already moving, his steps quick but controlled as he descended the Opera House's grand staircase. Hastings and Bernard followed, their shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. The guests, still lingering in the corridors, parted for them like water before a ship. As they rounded the final landing, they were met with a horrific sight. Leon, Mercier, the Marquis's valet, was lying motionless in the foyer, his body twisted unnaturally across the polished floor. A deep gash ran along his throat, his white shirt now soaked in crimson. The usher from earlier stood frozen nearby, his face ashen. I found him just now," the young man stammered. He was alive when I last saw him. I swear it." Poirot knelt beside the body, his fingers lightly brushing the valet's wrist. No pulse. His keen gaze swept the area, noting the position of the body, the direction of the wound, and the lack of a weapon nearby. Bernard gritted his teeth. "Merde, we had him in custody. Who the hell could have done this?" Poirot's voice was quiet, but firm. This was a silencing. Hastings shuddered. "You mean whoever killed the Marquis is tying up loose ends?" Poirot nodded. "And now, mes amis, the stakes have been raised." He turned to the usher. "Tell me, mon garçon, did anyone enter or leave this foyer just before you found the body?" The usher swallowed hard. No one, monsieur. I had just stepped away to fetch the inspector. When I returned, he was like this." Poirot's brows furrowed. "Then the killer did not flee." Bernard's eyes widened. "Are you saying they're still in the Opera House?" Poirot's expression was grave. "Yes, Inspector, and they may strike again." A deep, uneasy silence settled over the Grand Opera House. The first murder had been calculated, a performance in itself. The second was desperate, a hurried attempt to erase a clue before it could be spoken. And now the real question remained: who was next? Poirot turned to the gathered onlookers, his sharp eyes scanning the assembled faces. The murderer was among them, waiting for their moment. Poirot exhaled softly. "Mes amis," he murmured, "the game is no longer one of intrigue. It is one of survival." Chapter 6. Poirot's Hidden Clue, the Grand Foyer of the Royal Opera. House was silent, save for the muted murmurs of onlookers who dared to whisper. The body of Léon Mercier, the slain valet, lay sprawled in an unnatural position across the polished marble floor, his blood stark against the elegance of the setting. Poirot stood at the scene of the crime, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his expression unreadable. Two murders, one a spectacle, the other an act of desperation, both tied to the Marquis de la Roche. Inspector Bernard ran a hand through his graying hair, his voice tense. "This is madness, Poirot. First the Marquis, now his valet? If we don't act quickly, I fear we may find another corpse before the night is over." Poirot nodded slightly, his gaze scanning the area, committing every detail to memory. "Oui, mon ami. This is no longer merely a crime of intrigue. It has become a race against time." Hastings shook his head, his usual composure shaken. "But Why kill Mercier? Surely he was just a servant. Poirot's moustache twitched. Ah, but Hastings, even the smallest pawn can change the outcome of a chess match. A small movement near the entrance caught Poirot's attention. A young usher, pale-faced, lingered awkwardly, shifting his weight. Poirot's sharp gaze locked onto him. Mon garçon, he called, beckoning him forward. You were the one who found Mercier's body, no? The usher swallowed hard. Yes, Monsieur Poirot. Tell me, Poirot said, his tone gentle but firm. Did you notice anything unusual before you left the foyer? Even the smallest detail may prove to be of great importance. The usher hesitated, his brow furrowing. Well, He glanced at Bernard as though afraid to speak. Poirot gave him an encouraging nod. Go on, mon ami, he coaxed. It is not I you must fear. It is the truth left unspoken. The usher licked his lips, his nervousness evident. There was a scent. Hastings blinked. A scent? Yes, sir. Just before I left the foyer, I smelled something sharp, metallic. Poirot's eyes glimmered. Blood? The usher shook his head. No, something different. Like perfume, but bitter. A weighted silence filled the space. Poirot murmured, almost to himself. A bitter perfume. Intriguing. Bernard snorted. Perfume? This is a murder, not a fashion scandal. Poirot merely smiled slightly. Ah, but mon cher Bernard, perfume can be more telling than fingerprints. He turned his attention back to the suspects who had followed. Them down to the foyer, standing at a cautious distance, Madame Celeste Arnaud, the opera star, now visibly distressed, her hand clutching a silk handkerchief. Comte Armand Duval, arms crossed, his jaw tight with tension. Vivienne Morel, still poised despite the growing tension, her now unmasked face unreadable. Madame Isolde Beauchamp, the patroness, a flutter of nerves behind her forced elegance. Poirot exhaled softly, his mind assembling the pieces. A new thought surfaced. Poirot turned to Bernard. Inspector, tell me, where is the Marquise's personal ledger? Bernard frowned. His ledger? Yes, mon ami. A man of great wealth always keeps records. There may be something within his accounts that led to his death. Bernard hesitated, then turned to an officer nearby. The Marquis's belongings were taken to the station for examination. Have the ledger brought to Poirot immediately. The officer nodded and hurried away. Hastings looked at Poirot curiously. You suspect financial motives, old chap? Poirot shrugged. I suspect everything, mon ami, until the truth reveals itself. Poirot turned back to the suspects. Let us play a game, mes amis, he announced suddenly, his voice light, almost playful. Each of you shall answer one question. The tension deepened. Madame Celeste wrung her hands. What kind of question? Poirot smiled gently. A simple one, madame.
His gaze landed on each suspect in turn. Where were you at the precise moment the second act ended? A pause. Then, the answers began. Madame Celeste spoke first, her voice tight. I was backstage, Monsieur Poirot, preparing for my next performance, Comte.
Duval's jaw tightened. I was at the refreshment lounge. Ask anyone. Madame Beauchamp touched her pearls nervously. I had stepped into the corridor. Needed air. Vivienne Morel's gaze was steady. I was here, in the box, watching. Poirot nodded slowly. And none of you saw Mercier leave before he was later discovered dead. A chorus of negatives. Poirot's smile widened slightly. Ah, but you see, mes amis, someone here is lying. Ripple of discomfort. Hastings leaned in, whispering, What are you playing at, Poirot? Poirot murmured back, his voice barely above a whisper. Watch carefully, Hastings. One of them just reacted differently. At that moment, the officer returned, carrying the Marquis's ledger. He handed it to Poirot, who carefully flipped through its pages. A single entry caught his attention. He read it once, then again. His mustache twitched. Poirot slowly lifted his sharp gaze, landing directly on one person. "Madame Beauchamp," he said quietly. "Why did the Marquis write your name in his accounts?" The room froze. Madame Beauchamp turned pale. I don't know what you mean." Poirot stepped forward. "Do you not?" "Because it appears, madame, that you owed the Marquis a rather significant sum of money." A murmur spread through the crowd. Bernard straightened. "Is that true, Madame Beauchamp?" She hesitated, just a moment too long. Then she bolted. The movement was so sudden that the room erupted in chaos. Bernard lunged after her, catching her by the wrist before she could escape. "Let me go," she shrieked. "I didn't kill him." Poirot stepped closer, his eyes gleaming. "Non, madame," he murmured. "But I believe you know who did." A charged silence. Madame Beauchamp's shoulders shook. Then her lips trembled, and finally she whispered a name. Poirot's expression darkened, and in that moment he knew the case was about to reach its climax. Chapter 7. The Final Gathering. The gilded chandeliers of the Royal Opera House flickered, softly, casting dancing shadows across the tension-filled room. The whispers of the remaining guests had faded into an expectant silence, every breath weighed down by the gravity of the situation. Madame Isolde Beauchamp stood trembling, her once impeccable posture crumbling under the weight of Poirot's scrutiny. Inspector Bernard's grip on her wrist remained firm, though the true danger was no longer in her attempt to flee, but in the secrets she now carried. Poirot's sharp eyes did not waver. He stood immaculate, as always, but the room sensed the shift. He was preparing to strike. "Madame," Poirot's voice was soft, almost sympathetic, yet firm with authority. "You have spoken a name. Say it again." Beauchamp hesitated, her lips quivering. Her fingers twitched toward her pearls, but she stopped herself, perhaps realizing that nervous habits betray more than words ever could. She exhaled shakily, then finally whispered, "Comte Duval." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Comte Armand Duval, standing near the edge of the gathering, barely moved. His posture remained rigid, his face an impenetrable mask. But Poirot saw everything, the slight tightening of his jawline, the minuscule shift of... It was enough. Poirot nodded, satisfied. "Merci, Madame Beauchamp," he said quietly. "You may sit." Bernard released her. She collapsed into a chair, her hands trembling against her lap. Comte Duval let out a low chuckle, slow and measured. "A rather dramatic accusation, madame, but I fail to see why my name should be spoken." Poirot turned toward him smoothly, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Ah, Comte, but surely you know why." Bernard crossed his arms. "Well, Poirot, you've uncovered the name. Do we arrest him?" Poirot held up a finger. "Not yet, mon ami. First, let us examine the facts." He took a slow step forward, facing Duval directly. "You were the Marquise's closest confidant, his old friend, his drinking companion, his trusted associate. Yet when he was murdered, you did not seem surprised." Duval's expression remained neutral. "A man of power makes enemies, Monsieur Poirot. His death was unfortunate, but hardly unpredictable." Poirot's brows lifted. "Unfortunate? And yet, when you were asked where you had been during the second act, you hesitated before answering." Hastings stiffened. "That's true. I thought it was just nerves at the time." Poirot smiled faintly. "No, Hastings. A man like Comte Duval is not easily shaken. But a liar fears contradiction." Duval exhaled sharply. "I was in the refreshment lounge, as I said." Poirot turned to Bernard. "Tell me, Inspector, have your men confirmed this?" Bernard sighed. "We checked with the staff. No one remembers seeing Duval during the second act's intermission. Poirot's voice darkened. So, Comte, I ask you, where were you really? For the first time, Duval's expression flickered. Vivienne Morel, who had remained silent for much of the evening, suddenly spoke. Her voice was eerily calm. You were with the Marquis, weren't you? All eyes snapped toward her. Poirot's moustache twitched. Ah, Mademoiselle Morel, you have excellent instincts. Vivienne took a measured step forward, her mask now forgotten. You were the last to see him alive, weren't you, Comte? Duval's lips thinned. Poirot pounced. Tell me, Comte, what did you speak of? Duval exhaled sharply. Fine, he muttered. Yes, I saw him before the second act ended, but that does not mean I killed him. Poirot nodded slowly. Continue. Duval's fists clenched. We argued, that much I admit. The Marquis was making reckless decisions. He spoke of gambling debts, of selling assets, of desperation. I told him he was being a fool. Madame Celeste Arnaud gasped softly. He was in trouble? Poirot nodded. Indeed, madame. And what does a desperate man do when he sees no way out? A waited silence. Duval's expression hardened. You're suggesting he took his own life? Poirot shook his head. No, monsieur. I am suggesting that you helped him reach that end, Duval snapped. This is absurd! Poirot stepped closer. Is it, Comte? You were there. You had reason to be angry. Perhaps in the heat of the moment you drew a blade. Perhaps a struggle ensued. But then you realized you needed to make it look like something else. A horrified murmur spread. Bernard's hand hovered over his holster. Duval laughed bitterly. You have no proof. Poirot smiled thinly. Ah, but that is where... You are wrong, Comte. He turned toward the waiting officer. Bring me the Marquis's gloves. A moment later, the white opera gloves were placed in Poirot's hands. He turned them over delicately, his fingers tracing the inner lining. A tiny stain. Faint, but unmistakable. Poirot lifted his gaze. A bitter perfume, a hushed silence. Poirot inhaled the scent, then turned back to Duval. The usher smelled it earlier. A scent, not of flowers, but of poison. Vivienne's eyes widened. Poison? Poirot nodded. A rare one, absorbed through the skin, untraceable, unless one knows where to look. He turned back to Duval, his voice sharp as a knife. The Marquis was dying long before the blade touched him. Duval's face drained of color. Poirot stepped forward. You poisoned him earlier in the evening. A slow-acting toxin, perhaps slipped into his drink. And then, when he grew weak, you staged the rest. A stunned silence. Duval opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You see, Comte, you did not account for one thing. Hastings exhaled. And what's that? Poirot's voice was like steel. The greatest tragedies are not written by poets, nor performed on a stage. They are orchestrated by men who believe themselves above suspicion. Bernard stepped forward. Comte Armand Duval, you are under arrest. Duval stared at Poirot, his eyes burning with rage. Then, with a sudden, resigned breath, he lowered his head, and the game was over. Chapter 8. The Full Reveal. The Grand Opera House stood frozen in stunned silence as Comte Armand Duval bowed his head in resignation. The weight of Poirot's accusation had settled upon him, heavy and inescapable. Inspector Bernard's grip tightened around his arm, prepared to escort him away. But Poirot, ever meticulous, held up a finger, stopping the inspector's movement. Not yet, mon ami, Poirot said smoothly. We must let the tale finish playing out. A ripple of tension passed through the gathered onlookers. Even Madame Beauchamp, whose accusation had brought Duval to the forefront, looked uncertain. Hastings, always one for dramatic conclusions, leaned toward Poirot and murmured, "Haven't you already solved it, old chap?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, Hastings, have I ever given you an incomplete masterpiece? Non, mon ami. I will not be rushed. Let us examine every detail properly." His gaze swept the room, landing on Duval once more. "You poisoned the Marquis," Poirot continued, his voice calm but cutting. "A slow, deliberate toxin, absorbed through the skin, likely applied to something he handled frequently." Vivienne Morel, her composure slowly cracking, exhaled sharply. "The gloves?" Poirot nodded. "Yes, mademoiselle. The very gloves he wore throughout the evening. When he began to weaken, you seized the moment. You staged the attack, ensuring the fatal wound matched what you wished people to believe. A crime of misdirection, like a well-rehearsed performance." Few scattered gasps echoed through the room. Even those less astute could now see the elegant cruelty of the plan. But Duval did not react. He merely looked up at Poirot and smiled. A slow, chilling smile. Poirot did not falter. "You smile, Comte. Do you find my deductions amusing?" Duval's eyes glimmered. "No, Monsieur Poirot. I smile because you are wrong." A charged silence. Hastings stiffened. "By Jove, Poirot. Is he bluffing?" Poirot's expression did not change. "Ah," he murmured. "Then perhaps you wish to clarify, Comte?" Duval's smirk deepened. "Why not? Since you enjoy your game so much, allow me to play my final move." He turned slightly, looking toward the woman who had first spoken his name, Madame Beauchamp. The shift was small, subtle, like an afterthought. But Poirot caught it, and he understood. Poirot took a slow breath, adjusting his cuffs before speaking. "How very interesting," he said softly. From the very beginning, Comte Duval remained perfectly composed. Even when accused of murder, he did not panic, he did not flee, and he most certainly did not attempt to protest. He turned toward Madame Beauchamp, watching her stiffen ever so slightly. It is almost as if, deep down, he knew he was merely a sacrificial piece on the chessboard. Madame Beauchamp's hand clenched around her pearls. "That is ridiculous." Poirot smiled faintly. "Is it?" He took a slow step forward, his eyes locked onto hers. "You played your part exquisitely, madame. The terrified witness, the accidental accuser, the woman whose conscience could no longer bear the weight of secrecy." Beauchamp's face paled. "I don't know what you mean." Poirot tapped his temple. "Ah, but I think you do, madame. You accused Duval first, perhaps too quickly. And yet, if we were to believe your story, then how would you have known the poison had been applied to the gloves?" Beauchamp's breath hitched. A single moment. A single misstep. Hastings caught it immediately. "Good Lord, Poirot, she was the one who poisoned him." Poirot nodded. "Oui, mon ami. It was Madame Beauchamp all along." The room erupted. Beauchamp staggered back, but Poirot had already closed the distance between them. "You had motive," Poirot continued, his voice unwavering. "The Marquis held your debts, but he also held your past. You could not allow him to expose what he knew. And so, you orchestrated his demise." Beauchamp's hands trembled. "This is absurd. There is no proof." Poirot lifted a finger. "Non. Madame, there is always proof." He turned to Inspector Bernard. "You searched her belongings, did you not?" Bernard nodded warily. "Of course, but—" Poirot smiled knowingly. "Then perhaps you missed one small item." He turned back to Beauchamp. "The vial, madame. The perfume vial." A dead silence. Beauchamp's mouth opened, then closed. Poirot's voice was a whisper now. "It is not perfume you carry in that bottle, is it?" A single bead of sweat slipped down Beauchamp's temple. And then she ran. She barely made it 3 steps before Bernard tackled her, twisting her arm behind her. Back! The small silver perfume vial tumbled from her sleeve. rolling across the floor until it stopped at Poirot's feet. Poirot bent down, picking it up delicately. He uncorked it, sniffing carefully. A faint, bitter scent. Poirot nodded. As I suspected. A rare poison, colorless, odorless, except when applied in excess. A murderer's perfect tool. Beauchamp struggled in Bernard's grasp. "You fools! Do you think I did this alone?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ah, so you admit it was you?" Beauchamp froze. A quiet, broken laugh slipped from her lips. She closed her eyes. "What a clever little man you are." Poirot smiled faintly. "Merci, madame, but flattery will not save you now." Bernard secured her wrists, leading her away as the rest of the opera house watched in silent disbelief. Vivienne Morel, who had remained unnaturally quiet throughout the final moments, exhaled softly. Poirot turned to her, his gaze gentler now. "You knew, didn't you?" he asked. Vivienne's lips parted slightly. Then, after a pause, she nodded. "I suspected, but I was afraid to say it." Poirot tipped his head. "Fear is a powerful thing, mademoiselle, but the truth is stronger." As the gendarmes led Madame Beauchamp away, the opera house slowly returned to motion. Poirot watched as the remnants of the performance faded into history, a crime concealed beneath theater lights, now exposed for what it truly was. Hastings let out a deep breath. "Another case solved, old chap. Though I must say that was quite the act." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Ah, Hastings. In life as in opera, the grandest performances are always a deception." Poirot stepped forward, adjusting his cuffs. And, with that, the curtain fell on another mystery. Chapter 9. The aftermath and reflection. The Royal Opera House, once filled with the hushed elegance of whispered conversations and quiet anticipation, now stood in eerie silence. The echoes of the past night's performance, both theatrical and criminal, lingered in the air. Poirot watched as Madame Beauchamp was led away by the gendarmes, her wrists bound, her carefully composed image shattered. The other guests remained, in stunned disbelief, shifting uneasily as reality settled upon them. Inspector Bernard, his usually gruff demeanor softened, let out a breath as he turned to Poirot. "Mon Dieu, Poirot, that was quite something." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Oui, mon ami. It was a game played on the grandest stage, a crime of deception, of misdirection. Fitting for the opera, non?" Bernard rubbed the back of his neck. "She had us all fooled, right up until the end." Poirot smiled faintly. "That is the way of a skilled performer, Bernard. A lie, when told with enough conviction, becomes a second reality. But alas, the truth always finds a way to step into the light." The remaining guests, those untouched by handcuffs or suspicion, slowly gathered near the grand staircase, their expressions ranging from relief to unease. Vivienne Morel, her posture finally relaxing, exhaled softly as she stepped closer to Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot," she murmured, "I owe you my gratitude. If not for you, the wrong person might have been arrested tonight." Poirot dipped his head slightly. "Mademoiselle, the truth has a way of revealing itself in the end. It only requires the right mind to listen." Her gaze flickered toward where Comte Duval was being escorted away, though not in handcuffs. Unlike Beauchamp, he had played his role, but he had not been the one to pull the final strings. Duval, stoic but composed, met Poirot's gaze with something between irritation and admiration. "You're an insufferable man, Poirot." Poirot's eyebrows lifted. "And yet, Comte, it was not I who played the fool this evening." Duval chuckled dryly. "No, that honor goes to Beauchamp." Poirot tilted his head. "And to you, perhaps, for allowing yourself to be used as a distraction." Duval's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned, adjusting his cuffs, his dignity barely intact as he strode away. Hastings, who had remained suspiciously quiet, finally huffed loudly, crossing his arms. "Well, Poirot, I must say I feel quite ridiculous. I was so convinced it was Duval. You let me believe it, didn't you?" Poirot's eyes twinkled mischievously. "Mon ami, you are the perfect audience. If I had told you the answer too soon, would it have been nearly as satisfying?" Hastings grumbled. "You treat these cases like a stage play." Poirot tapped his temple. "And why not? Life, Hastings, is merely a series of performances. We wear masks, we deliver lines, we play roles. But in the end, it is not the costume that matters, it is the truth that lies beneath." Hastings let out an exasperated sigh. "I still don't see how you knew it was Beauchamp." "The poison, yes. But why did she try to frame Duval?" Poirot's expression darkened slightly. "Because, mon ami, she needed a villain, and Duval, already tangled in the Marquise's affairs, was the most convenient one." As the tension began to settle, an officer returned, carrying the Marquis's ledger, now closed, its secrets laid bare. Poirot accepted it with deliberate care, flipping through the pages one last time. Every line, every transaction, every debt, all written in careful detail. Vivienne Morel, standing close enough to see, murmured, "What will become of his estate now?" Poirot closed the book with a soft snap. "That, mademoiselle, is for the courts to decide. Money, like power, has a way of outliving its owner." Hastings sighed. "And here I thought we were dealing with something romantic. Scorned lovers, betrayal, hidden affairs." Poirot smiled slightly. "Ah, Hastings, romance and murder, they are more similar than you think. Both rely on P." Vivienne gave him a curious look. "And you, Monsieur Poirot? Have you ever been in love?" Poirot's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. A brief shadow crossed his sharp eyes. "Ah, mademoiselle," he said lightly. "That is a mystery for another evening." Vivienne, recognizing the private nature of his response, dipped her head slightly in acknowledgement. Poirot carefully placed the ledger into the hands of Inspector Bernard, his voice firm. "Lock this away, Bernard. The dead no longer need their debts, but the living will surely fight for them." Bernard nodded. "Consider it done." With the case resolved, the Royal Opera House finally began to empty. The guests departed in silence, their minds heavy with the knowledge that what had begun as a performance had ended in tragedy. Madame Beauchamp's fate was sealed. A widow, a murderer, a woman who had gambled everything and lost. Poirot, ever meticulous, took one last glance at the opera house before turning toward the exit. Hastings walked beside him, his brow furrowed in thought. "You know, Poirot, I must say, this was one of your more theatrical cases." Poirot chuckled softly. "Indeed, Hastings. But as I have said before, all the world is a stage." Hastings sighed. "I do wish you'd stop quoting Shakespeare." "At me." Poirot's smile widened. "Ah, mon ami, but Shakespeare understood the heart of men far better than most detectives." They stepped out into the crisp night air, the glow of the opera house fading behind them. Another case closed, another curtain drawn, and somewhere in the distance the city of Paris continued its own silent performance, one of love, deception, and the endless search for truth. Poirot straightened his coat and sighed softly. Tomorrow there would be another mystery. But tonight the case was finished. Chapter 10. The Final Reflection and Poirot's Exit. The Parisian night lay draped over, the city like a velvet curtain, the final act of an evening filled with deception, revelation, and resolution. The grandeur of the Royal Opera House still loomed behind Poirot and Hastings, its once dazzling lights now dimmed, a silent monument to the crime that had unfolded within. Poirot paused at the edge of the steps, taking in the cool night air. There was something profoundly satisfying about the closure of a case, the neat arrangement of truth, the careful alignment of justice. Hastings, however, seemed unsettled. He tucked his hands into his coat pockets, his brow furrowed in thought. "Poirot," he began, "do you ever wonder what drives people to murder? I mean, truly." Poirot's mustache twitched, and he tilted his head slightly. "Ah, Hastings. Murder is not so very different from love." Hastings stared. "I beg your pardon?" Poirot's expression softened, yet there was a sharpness in his gaze. The same emotions that fuel love, passion, jealousy, fear, longing, are the very things that drive men and women to kill. The difference, mon ami, is that love is an act of creation, while murder is an act of destruction. Hastings let out a low whistle. "I say, Poirot, that's rather poetic." Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps. But the truth, Hastings, is always found in the hearts of men and women. We are not logical creatures. We are stories waiting to be told." They began walking, their footsteps echoing on the cobblestone streets. After a few moments of silence, Hastings spoke again. "Do you think Beauchamp ever had a chance? To get away with it, I mean." Poirot shook his head. "Non, mon ami. The fatal flaw of all criminals, of all liars, is that they believe themselves to be more clever than those around them. But deception is a fragile thing." He turned his gaze to Hastings. "You remember how Madame Beauchamp made her mistake?" Hastings nodded. "She tried too hard to frame Duval. If she had stayed quiet, we might never have suspected her." Poirot spread his hands. "Exactly. She needed a villain, and in her desperation, she played her role too well. She did not understand the true nature of a lie." Hastings frowned. "And what's that?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That every lie must be crafted with the greatest precision, not to fool the world, but to fool oneself." Hastings shuddered. "Rather chilling, if you ask me." Poirot chuckled. "Then let us be glad, mon ami, that we are on the side of the truth." The two men turned down a quiet street, where the soft glow of a small cafe welcomed them with its warmth. The scent of brewed coffee and fresh pastries drifted into the air, a stark contrast to the events of the night. Poirot led them to a corner table, where a waiter approached with ease, recognizing the famous detective at once. "Monsieur Poirot," he greeted with an elegant nod. "Your usual?" Poirot smiled. "Oui, mon ami, and for my dear Hastings, a coffee to ease his troubled mind." Hastings huffed. "My mind isn't troubled, just contemplative." Poirot chuckled. "Ah, mon ami, it is good to contemplate, but not to dwell. The case is closed. The truth is revealed. What more is there?" Hastings sighed. "I suppose you're right. It's just, I can't help but wonder what might have happened if we hadn't been there tonight." Poirot's expression grew pensive. "Then perhaps the opera would have continued. The performance would have played its final notes, and in the end, a murderer would have slipped away, lost in the crowd." He picked up his spoon, stirring his coffee gently. "But, mon ami, fate is a curious thing. It is as though we were meant to be there, to play our roles in this grand drama. And so, the curtain fell as it should." Hastings shook his head, smiling. "Only you, Poirot, could make a murder investigation sound like a work of art." Poirot winked. "Ah, Hastings, but is that not what life is? A grand composition where every note, every pause, every silence matters." Hastings chuckled. "Perhaps you should have been a poet, not a detective." Poirot sipped his coffee, his expression unreadable. "Ah, mon ami, perhaps the two are not so different." As the night deepened, the streets of Paris remained as lively as ever. The crime at the Opera House would fade into history, a mere footnote in the endless march of time. For Poirot, there would be another case, another deception to unravel, another puzzle to solve. But for now, as he sat with his oldest friend, enjoying the warmth of a simple cafe, he allowed himself a moment of peace. The performance was over. The truth had taken its final bow. And somewhere, beyond the flickering lamplight, the world continued on, its secrets waiting to be uncovered.